forward. Hare Krishna. So for the people who are watching in other countries or other places, we are in outside Brisbane.
In Brisbane.
In Brisbane. Oh my God, it's serious. So we're in Brisbane, and is there a Bhagavad Gita in the house?
Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you all for coming. Tonight I will read from chapter 4 of Bhagavad Gita. There's a section here which in the Mahabharata would be called, or even in the Bhagavatam, Avatara Katha, narrations about the Lord's descent into this world. It's call it Avatara theology. It's actually sort of a tricky topic. If you look at the early, you could say, theological history of Christianity, there were all kinds of philosophical, or you could say theological debates. And come in. Hare Krishna at the door. What's he selling? So if you look at those very early debates, and the losers were called heretics, and the winners were called the only true church or something. But if you look at these early debates, they really, most of them centered on, you could say, a philosophical problem, which has also been, you could say, a philosophical problem in India regarding the descent of Krishna. And that is, start with the case of Jesus and then go over to Krishna. There were two oh my God, you're really do the bell. Is there any way to kind of de-bell them? A lot of times in temples they just kind of like don't do the bell because then it's can we communicate with him? Anyway, one powerful fact was that Jesus in some way appeared to be divine. That somehow to have a special connection with God, to have some kind of special divine empowerment. And people weren't sure exactly what the nature of that was. And could you ask him just not to do the bell? It's kind of not drive any normal man crazy. Thank you. So, on the other hand, there was an undeniable humanity to Jesus. I mean, he came to earth and he was born and grew up and was ultimately killed by the Roman government in Israel. And so people were trying to reconcile these two facts, that he had very much a human side, but he had some kind of divine side. And there are many different theories, like maybe Jesus was a human being that received a special blessing from God to do work in this world. And some people thought, no, he's actually a divine being that sort of acted like a human being. And some people thought, well, maybe there was like a human Jesus and then a divine Christ, and they kind of inhabited the same body. And there were all kinds of different theories. and it wasn't clear which one was right. So what does it mean to be divine? If a human being, if someone acts like a human being or appears like a human being, in what sense are they divine? What does it mean to be divine? And how are they human? So this was debated a lot. And there were all, and so again, the losers, all the theories that ultimately lost in that it was somewhat of a religious political game, they became heresies. And so there's a whole list of heresies. Anyway, they finally, I won't go into Christian history right now because I have very strong views on it, but I won't go into that right now, and how they came up with the Trinity doctrine and all that. But let's look at Krishna. I mean, there were many different theories even about Krishna. In Queen Kunti's prayers in the Bhagavatam, she even says that people have different ideas about what you're doing here. Because, for example, we know that many people throughout history have believed that there's some kind of impersonal or at least incorporeal, that means no body, God, and somehow that formless God inhabited a human-like body of Krishna in order to do something in this world. And some people actually believe that. Other people may believe, and we know that, for example, some people on earth at the time thought Krishna was just a human being. This is really discussed perhaps most famously when Krishna entered the wrestling arena of Kamsa and was perceived in different ways. There's a very famous verse, how Krishna was perceived in different ways by different people depending on their spiritual level. Some of them had basically no spiritual level, and other people were advanced. So most people concluded at the time that Krishna is very special. He's not an ordinary human being, that in some way he's divine, and yet he acts like a human being. In fact, the Bhagavatam, this is discussed right in the first chapter of the Bhagavatam, where Krishna is described as Kapata Manusha. Kapata Manusha means a kind of like a pretending to be a human being. And so Krishna kind of faked a lot of people out for his own reasons. And also in the prayers of Kunti, she says that when Krishna comes to this world, he comes nato natya taro jata, like an actor in costume. Like an actor in costume. And so ultimately, Krishna talks about these things in the Bhagavad Gita and ultimately clarifies who he really is. And of course, not most people, but many people, even though Krishna explains these things very clearly, some people are determined to misunderstand. But Krishna really does, for example, so I'm going to read some of these verses to show how Krishna explains himself, explains what he's doing in this world. Like, that's interesting. You're just out in the material world, suddenly bump into God. So it's like, what are you doing here? So Krishna explains what he's doing here. So we'll begin in the 4th chapter.
Would the mic a little closer?
Sure, for a price. Make me an offer I can't refuse. Well,
See me after all.
so is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. At the end, it's always good, like when you start a chapter, it's interesting to see how the previous chapter ended. So the previous chapter is really not talking about this. Krishna is talking about actually one of the most fascinating verses in the Gita. Philosophically, it says, Evam Buddhe Parang Buddhwa, which means, if you want to make it very literal, thus intellecting what is beyond intelligence. In other words, we have intelligence, but intelligence has to find its own limits. After all, you don't want to have narcissistic booty, intelligence. And so one of the first jobs of your analytic intelligence is that intelligence must intellect, because Krishna uses the same verb, its own limits. That's a big part of life, right? Finding your own limits so we don't make fools of ourselves or just frustrate ourselves or end up defeating ourselves. So intelligence has to find its own limits. And it's interesting because that's the last thing Krishna says before he launches into an explanation of how he comes to this world. So, so in chapter 4, Krishna begins by saying, Sri Bhagavan Vakshalakshmi. Krishna didn't say that. Supreme Lord said. Imang vivaspade yogam proktavanaham aviya, which means literally, I actually have spoken. It's actually sort of a perfect past tense. I have spoken this yoga. That's what Krishna calls it, this yoga, Imam yoga. I have spoken this yoga, this unperishing yoga. Unperishing yoga. Sanskrit is very interesting. I'll give you a little example. The word avyaya, which is a common word in the Gita and the Bhagavatam, which Prabhupada here translates imperishable. It's actually composed of 3 elements, avyaya. Aya means going, and V means away. You know Italian, they say via. It's like Sanskrit, via means away. So vyaya means literally going away. And means not going away. Avyaya. So Krishna says that I spoke to Vivaswan, the ruler of the sun, this yoga, which here means spiritual practice, or spiritual science, which doesn't go away, it's imperishable. And then Vivaswan Manave Praha, Vivaswan spoke to Manu Ikshvaku Devapravi. And Manu spoke to Ikshvaku. And then Krishna says, Evam, thus. In other words, he's saying that in this way, that I spoke to Vivaswan, he spoke to his son Manu, he spoke to his son Ikshvaku. Thus, Parampara Praptam Imam. Thus, this spiritual science is received, or Praptam is received or is realized through Parampara, which in Sanskrit literally means succession. Evam Parampara Praptam Imam Rajarsayo Vidu. Thus, the literally royal sages, which Rajarshis, literally royal sages, understood it in that way. But sa means that spiritual science. Kalena, through time, iha, in this world, mahata, by great time. Mahata just means like mahakala, by great time, which could mean that time is very powerful. And as Krishna will explain in chapter 11, time destroys all the worlds. Or it can also mean by a very long time. So by great time in this world, yogo nashta, that spiritual science was lost. Parampara, origin. And then Krishna says Saiva, which means that very spiritual science, that very science. Saivayam Mayatedya, by me to you today. Mayatedya, by me to you today. Yoga, that very same spiritual science, spoken today by me to you. That's my science, which is Puratana, ancient. It's an ancient spiritual science. Primordial spiritual science. Because Bhaktosi, you are my devotee, Bhaktosi me Sakha, and also my friend. And therefore, and that's why I'm speaking to you this rahasyam, this mystery. The word rahasya, or sometimes Krishna uses the word guhyam, sort of a synonym. It's a mystery or a secret in the sense that it's advanced knowledge. For example, there was sort of an unfortunate French philosopher among many somewhat unfortunate French philosophers in the 20th century named Foucault. And I guess that's what happens if you smoke too many cigarettes in Paris. Take too much coffee at the cafe. So it's funny because I saw this interview on YouTube with an American philosopher who knew Foucault, and he said to Foucault, who was a very famous French philosopher, that when I talk to you, I can understand what you're saying, but when I read your books, I can't figure out what you're talking about. And Foucault said, well, that's because in France, if you don't say things in very complicated ways that people can't understand, no one takes you seriously. And actually, if you look at almost most academic departments, they seem to have a wonderful enthusiasm for speaking in a way that no one can understand. Sort of creating these meta languages, these very technical languages, and because they want it to be a secret. It's like an initiation rite. Like if you want to enter into the mysteries of, I don't know, petroleum geology or something, which is obviously something which fascinates most people, then you have to learn all this technical jargon. The humanities are even worse because unless they had all the technical jargon, like in English departments, people might figure out they don't know what the hell they're talking about. So it's so you see all kinds of disciplines. It's a way of, let's say, concealing really a body of knowledge from those who have not been initiated, who have not gotten the necessary degrees, who have not passed the tests and been initiated into the science of a particular academic field. So in this case, Bhagavad Gita is very interesting. Bhagavad Gita is so hidden in plain sight. Because if you actually read the Sanskrit of the Bhagavad Gita, if you're fluent in Sanskrit, it's elegant. It's certainly elegant and beautifully composed, but it's also simple. And that's part of its elegance. It's profound, but it's very simple. And yet people read it and they just can't, for the life of them, they can't figure out what Krishna's saying, or they imagine he's saying something else. And it's always sort of mystified me, like, how could people read the Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit and just be so clueless when it's so simply stated, like they say, hidden in plain sight. And so somehow or other, Krishna has made it a rahasyam, which is translated here as mystery, because there are qualifications. Just like, for example, people that work for the government, there's classified information. So mystery kind of sounds like, I don't know, Agatha Christie or something, but the word rahasya really just means that it's advanced knowledge, it's classified information. And so, because information is classified when it's only available to qualified people who can be trusted. And Krishna has really performed this amazing, I don't want to say trick, but just this amazing feat where he's explained himself very clearly in simple, elegant Sanskrit, and all these big scholars read it and totally can't figure it out. And it really is a very powerful example of Yoga Maya. It's amazing. So anyway, Krishna says it's Rihasya, and he says it's the Uttamam. It's the supreme advanced knowledge. It's the supreme mystery or the supreme confidential knowledge. And then, so Arjun, does Arjun say, Jai Krishna? No. He says, wait a second. There's something wrong with that picture that you just painted for me. So Arjun thinks he's Arjun thinks it's like a gotcha moment with Krishna. That he's actually detected a problem. So Arjuna said, Aparang bhavata janma, which Aparang janma vivasata, which means your birth was later. Literally, your birth was later, and Vivasam's birth was earlier. So katamita vijaniyam, which literally means, how can I understand this? How can I understand this? Katamita vijaniyam. Atvamadao proktavaniti. That, quote, you in the beginning spoke. And mean like the Bhagavad Gita. How can I understand this? That in the beginning you spoke this Gita. Because Devasam's older than you, a lot older than you. So, and then Arjuna says, Katameta Vijaniyam. So, I translate this. So the next verse, Sri Bhagavan Vacha, Krishna answers that Bahuni, many, Bahuni me vyatitani janmani, many births of mine have passed. Maybe in this particular appearance, I'm younger than Vivasvan, but I have many, many appearances in this world. Bahuni me vyatitani janmani, tavacharja, and you too, Arjuna. And you too. Taniyam Veda Sarvani, I know all of them. Natvam, not you. Natvam Veda Paranta, but you don't know all of these births. So here we get this great distinction between God and the living being. That, not Arjuna, but we, we're a little dumb. We don't understand all these things because we're just tiny souls, conditioned souls. So Krishna tells Arjuna that I know all of them, but you don't. And now Krishna, having said that, Krishna is going to describe or talk about the nature of his appearances in this world, his births in this world. And the first thing he says, a Jopi, son, even being unborn. So logically, this is called a paradox. A paradox is an apparent contradiction. It looks like a contradiction, but when you look closer, you see that it's not. I say it's kind of like a philosophical speed bump. They put those, they say it in Australia. You have to slow down, so you can't speed read the Bhagavad Gita because it's got these speed bumps in it. And that's why wisdom literature often has paradoxes. Like slow down and pay attention. So Krishna says, even being literally unborn. He just said that I have many births. Now he says, actually I'm unborn. So Jopi son, Abhiyatma, and myself is unperishing. Same word, Abhyaya. Krishna described this spiritual science as Abhyaya, doesn't go away. In other words, unperishing. And here he says, I'm also, myself is unperishing, just like the science. So an unperishing self speaks an unperishing science. So Jopi san Abhiyatma, Bhutanam Isharopi san, and even being the Lord of creatures. Now Krishna has twice, in the first two parts of this verse, used the word api, like even though. And so that means he's going to say something which you wouldn't expect. In other words, even though I'm this, and even though I'm that, still I do something. So what does he do? He's preparing Arjuna. And he tells Arjuna, even though I'm unborn, and I'm the Lord of creatures, Prakritim Swam Adhishtaya. And I will translate this very literally because it's a crucial point in our philosophy that Krishna doesn't have a material body. So Prakriti just means nature, material nature. And Swam, Krishna says my own nature. my own nature. It's my own energy. Krishna is dealing with his own energy. And he says, Adhishtaya. Sta is the same as English, stand. And Adhi in Sanskrit means over or above. So Adhishtaya means standing over, standing above, or standing upon. In other words, Prabhupada translates it here being so situated, but it can mean like governing something, like controlling something, because you're standing over it, you're standing above it. So standing above or standing upon my own energy. Sambhavami, I appear. Atma Mayaya, by my own mystic power. So, there's a lot in this verse, in this sloka, that even though Krishna, his self, is unperishing. Because, again, when we are materially conditioned, like you have rose-colored glasses, the world looks rose-colored. And if you have Prakriti-colored glasses, if you are seeing the world through material eyes, then everything looks material. And if you look at Krishna through material eyes, it's like if you go to the movie and they didn't give you the 3D glasses. God, this is a bad movie, because you haven't got the 3D glasses. So Krishna is saying, even though myself is unperishing, and even though I'm the Lord, I still appear in this world. Because some people think that God wouldn't do that. Or that if God does come, he would come in a material form. And Krishna saying, no, I'm not within material nature. I'm standing above it. That's what he literally says. I'm standing above material nature. And I'm appearing by my own mystic power. I'm not appearing, let's say, by the laws of nature. I'm appearing by my own power, standing above material nature. And that's literally what he says. And then, having explained how Krishna comes, now he's going to explain why he comes. He says, yada yada. In Sanskrit, if you repeat a word like when, it means whenever. That's how you say whenever in Sanskrit. Yada yada. Yada means when. So yada yada hi dharmasya, indeed, whenever glanir bhavati bharata bharata, there is a glani. Glani means weakening or collapse or corruption of dharma. And dharma here means, it doesn't mean a religion like Christianity or Judaism or Islam. Dharma means the sacred laws of the universe. And it also means obedience to those sacred laws. So when dharma, in a sense, dharma means law. That's the word for law in Sanskrit. And in English, for example, we can talk about an unjust law, but you can't talk about an unjust dharma because dharma also means justice. So because the same word means law and justice, it means an infallible divine law, the law of God. Just like Krishna, it said in the Bhagavatam, Dharmam hi sakshat bhagavata gita. Then dharma literally is brought forward. Pranita literally means brought forth by the Lord personally. Sakshat, which actually means like in person. For example, if we say, did you see him in person? It means you actually saw him with your eyes, not you saw him on a computer screen or a movie, but did you see him in person? And that's what sakshat means. Because aksha means the eye, or seeing, and sa means with, like with your own eyes. So sakshat means like with your own eyes. And so if you say sakshat bhagavat, it means kind of like the Lord personally, in person. And so, so here Krishna says that mean, in a sense, because Dharma is the law of God, it never actually collapses because the law is there. Even people, for example, let's say there's a law that you can't take a bunch of merchandise from a store and not pay for it. That's against the law. But won't talk about the early days of the movement. So when Krishna says that whenever there's a dharma glani, a weakening, or as Prabhupada translates it here, discrepancies or corruption, it means in following dharma. Because even in let's say ordinary terms of jurisprudence or criminology and so on, we can talk about a law being weakened. Like, for example, let's say you're driving through the outback and, there's like nothing for the next, several hundred kilometers. In America, that'll be like driving through Utah or Arizona or something. I mean, I've seen that in Utah, you can be where you can actually see because you're up high and you go, and basically when you're going east to west or west to east, you go up and over a series of mountain ranges, and you can see like 40, 50 miles ahead. And if there's a car coming, you can literally see it like 40 miles ahead because the sun reflects on it. And so sometimes you'll be on a road and you see there's no traffic the next 30 or 40 miles as, speed limit like 100 kilometers an hour. And if you go like 100, you go 140 kilometers an hour, people are honking and passing you. And so there's a principle in criminology that it's actually became a thing called zero tolerance. Criminology studies showed that, let's say in a neighborhood, if the government tolerates even minor crimes, that leads to a general sense of lawlessness and people commit greater crimes. Like, for example, if you allow people to jaywalk, you allow people to jaywalk, or let's say there's a broken window in a government building, it's not fixed, it creates a general sense of lawlessness. And then people start breaking bigger laws. And that was called the zero tolerance principle, that if you don't tolerate any law breaking, you get a much better situation. Which is one reason, by the way, just a note on Vedic philosophy of law, why some things are permitted, like kings hunting, or for kings, not so much for ordinary people, like say polygamy, because they're going to do it anyway. I mean, you look at the political history of any country, you'll find often that the leaders, the heads of state, were, let's say, promiscuous. We have examples in America like Kennedy, who apparently had the Secret Service kind of, had the girls waiting in line to see the president. So political leaders, if you study political history, you'll find it's very common that political leaders are promiscuous. And so it's kind of like a strategy. Should you make laws that people won't follow, and thus weaken the very sense of following the law, or should the laws, to some extent, model actual human behavior, inevitable human behavior? And so it's an interesting legal strategy you find, say, in the Bhagavatam or the Mahabharata, because take, for example, polygamy, in which you find, not always, but you find fairly often among kings. And so it's interesting because kings tend to be promiscuous anyway. So technically it's allowed, but then it's highly discouraged in another way by all these stories showing how great kings ruined their life by polygamy. Like, for example, we can start with Dasharatha, who basically, because he had more than one wife, basically ultimately led to his death and the vanishing to the forest of his son Ramchandra and so on. And then you have the case of Vichitravirya, who had a few very beautiful wives, and he had sort of like an extended honeymoon and eventually died from it. He literally just destroyed his health with these fine young ladies from Kashi. And then, who else do we have?
Chitraketu.
What?
Chitraketu.
Well, Chitraketu, yeah, he was cursed, but that was for a different reason. But well, Pandu was cursed. That was for a hunting accident, though. He was cursed by him. But again, he was attracted by one of his wives. And I'm trying to think. There are other people in the list. Yeah, that's a good example. Dhruva's father. It's interesting, the names of these two wives. Suruchi means very appealing, and Suniti means very virtuous. So he went for the first one. Actually, another example I want to give is hunting accidents. Actually, because hunting's allowed for kings, but kings always end up destroying their lives by hunting accidents. So we have Dasharatha, who ultimately his life was ruined. He was cursed because of a hunting accident. And then, of course, Parikshit literally died because of a hunting accident. Pandu died because of a hunting accident. So let's say if you're a king and you're reading all these stories, yeah, you can hunt, but here are all these great kings that died because of hunting accidents. So it's interesting because it gets to the that question: what rules should be left? What rules should actually be laws, and what should just be cultural principles? What should be legislated? What should just be left to tradition or and so on, culture? But in any case, so Krishna says when Dharma, there's a corruption of Dharma, and Dharma is declining, people just aren't following the rules, the God-given system for human life. When people aren't following this, then Krishna says, and he says, Dharma is weakening, abhiyutanam. Abhiyuta, abhi means here like aggressively, and ut means up, and tana means like stand, like rising. So when adharma is sort of like aggressively rising, adharma, Krishna says, then I manifest myself. So that's why he comes, and then what does he do when he gets here? Krishna says, Parijranaya sadhunam. I rescue, I save good people. I save good people. If you know the New Testament, the sheep and the goats. Vinashaya cha duskritam. And I come to destroy the bad people. People who are doing bad things, literally, people who are doing bad things. And dharma samstapanartaya, to reestablish, for the purpose of reestablishing dharma, sambhavami yuga yuga, I appear in every yuga. And then, maybe I'll conclude, because this particular section ends with the following verse. Krishna says, Janma karma chami divya. Because first he said, I have many births and you too, Arjuna, I know them, you don't. And then he said, actually, I'm unborn. So Krishna is now going to resolve that paradox. And he says, Janma karma chami divyam. I have birth, but it's divine. It's not a human birth. It's not a material birth. It's a divine appearance. Divyam, divine. So Janma karma chami divyam evam joveti tattvata, and one who understands it, tattvataha. The word tattvataha is translated in reality. So I'll explain what the word tattva means. Taha at the end just makes an adverb, like in that way, like in truth or truthfully. So tattva in Sanskrit is Tut. Tut is English, that. Just add an H and it's English. And it's the same word, by the way. So that in English is a demonstrative pronoun, meaning it demonstrates, it points something out, like that. When you say that, you're pointing to something, either physically pointing to it or alluding to it by what you're saying. So it's a demonstrative pronoun. And toi, and therefore tut, or that, in philosophical Sanskrit, as in the term Om Tat Sat, it comes to mean a real object. A real object, because you can't point out something which doesn't exist. So because tut, that, is pointing out something, it can only point out a real thing, and therefore tut comes to mean a fundamental real thing. And then toi means having the quality of, having the state, like the state of being. So tattva means the state of being a fundamental real thing. And that's why we say, for example, jiva tattva, because it means the jiva as a fundamental category of a real thing, a fundamental real thing. So it's like categorical. So jiva tattva, Vishnu tattva, and Prakriti tattva. Now, when Krishna says you have to know my birth and activities in the sense of tattva, and by the way, this is the same word Krishna uses in 434, that famous verse that we translate, try to learn the truth by approaching a bona fide. What Krishna says there is tat vidhi, know that. Vidhi, by the way, is just the verb vid, like Veda. And that's where we get English words like vision, video, all that. The Latin or Italian vedere means to see. So Krishna says tat vidhi, know that. Anyway. And then pranipatena, by submission and service and so on, by questioning. And then he says, upadekshanti te jnana, they will teach you knowledge, those who have knowledge. Upadekshanti, by the way, is the future plural of upadesha, like upadeshamrita, instruction. I think we're having sort of a baby event here. So, sorry, red card. Actually, if you stand just right back there, you can hear. And, sure. So, upadekshanti means they will teach, or they will instruct. That's like upadeshamrita, nectar of instruction. So, upadekshanti, they will instruct. Knowledge, those, and Krishna says the people who will give you knowledge are tattva darshina, those who see tattva. And we translate that seers of the truth, which is, that's okay, but what Krishna is literally saying in Sanskrit, that those who are seers of tattva, those who are seers of tattva. And of course, there's the famous Bhagavatam verse, Vedanti tat tattva vidas, and so on. And here, in this verse, Krishna says, one who know my birth and activities, tattvataha, in the sense of tattva. So what does that mean? It means that you have to understand the fundamental categories of reality, which are God, the soul, and nature. That's called Tattva Traya, the triad, the three fundamental real things that exist, which are God, the soul, and nature. And so when Krishna says, those who have knowledge will teach you knowledge, those who are seers of Tattva. For example, imagine if someone thinks that Krishna has a material body, it is a tattva mistake. Because you're confusing Ishvara or Vishnu and Prakriti. Or if someone is an unfortunate impersonalist that thinks I'm God, another category mistake, because you confuse Vishnu and Jiva. Or if someone thinks that I am my body, I'm this body, I'm a true blue Aussie, or whatever. Again, it's a category mistake. It's a fundamental category mistake because you confuse Jiva and Prakriti. So when Krishna says you have to know my birth and activities through tattva, he means you have to understand all the basic categories. Number one, that I'm not a Jiva, I'm not an individual soul, and I don't have a material body. So if you understand that Krishna is in the God category, and that his body is also spiritual, then you've gotten the tattva straight. And that's what Krishna's talking about. In the same way, you learn the truth in verse 434, Tadvidhi, in the sense that you have to learn from people who have seen these three categories, Vishnu, Jiva, and Prakriti, and don't confuse them. And it's interesting because you have to make this distinction, and the word distinction in Sanskrit is vishesha. And so someone who cannot make these distinctions is a nirvisheshavadi, which is what Prabhupada in his pranam mantra, nirvishesha shunyavadi paschatya deshatarine. So in Prabhupada's pranam mantra, he describes himself as saving the Western countries from shunyavadi, which means teaching voidism, and nirvishesha, teaching that there's no difference, no distinction between God and the soul. That's nirvishesha, no distinction. And to make the distinction, what you distinguish is the tattvas. You understand? It's very simple. It's all related. So here Krishna says specifically that those who understand my janma, my birth and activities, karma, which are divine, and one who understands them through tattva, fundamental categories, then tyaktva deham, giving up this body, punar janma, another birth, naiti, one does not go to another birth. Mameti, one comes to me, Arjuna. So it's very interesting that the power of knowledge, the power of knowledge, and at the end of the fourth chapter, Krishna will really drive home this point of how powerful knowledge is. And there's a verse, for example, I think it's in chapter 5, where Krishna says, Shreyan dravyamaya jagya jnana jagya, that there's an offering to God, sacrifice, where you offer paraphernalia, like for example, do puja. Now Krishna doesn't say not to do it. He just says there's a more important offering, Shreya. Shreya in Sanskrit, the word Shri means like opulent or beautiful or bringing good fortune. And very Shri, the comparative degree of Shri, is Shreya. And most Shri is Shrestha. For those of you who are grammar fans, I find it interesting that we have from Sanskrit still putting ST at the end of a word to make it the superlative degree, like best, greatest, finest. And that's Sanskrit. Shrestha, the ST is the superlative degree. Anyway, or for example, guru means heavy because they're always giving you opulent prasad. Hence, guru means heavy. But anyway, guru means heavy, and then very heavy. It also means, that's how you say important in Sanskrit also. Gravitas, right? Actually, the word gravitas is from guru. gravitas, gravity, because heaviness in Sanskrit from guru is gaurava. So gaurava, gravitas, all that, gravity. So anyway, very guru is gariyan, and most guru is garishta. Again, the ST for the superlative, which we still have in English, by the way. So anyway, back to our main feature. So the power of knowledge. So Krishna says that better than an offering, which is dravya maya, which consists of paraphernalia, material, physical paraphernalia. Krishna says better than that jnana yajna, the offering of knowledge, where you offer your consciousness to God and you devote yourself to knowledge, learning yourself and giving knowledge to others. That's the higher position. This movement is really meant to be about knowledge. We do perform, Prabhupada taught us, Prabhupada, we certainly perform these ceremonies such as Arti. They're part of our spiritual path. But ultimately, Prabhupada said, the real point is knowledge. So, what Krishna says about, let me see if I can find those verses very quickly here. This is the same chapter where he says, Tad Vidhi, and so on. Yes, Krishna, there's this really interesting section where Krishna just glorifies knowledge, like it's really about knowledge. It's about knowing. And that starts at the same chapter, 437, after saying that those who have seen Tattva will give you knowledge because they have knowledge. Then Krishna says, Yatai Damsi Sami Dogni or Basmasakra, just as the blazing fire, Agni, we still have Agni in English, in the word ignite, right? That's Agni. It's all there, if you look. So, Samidhognir means like the blazing fire, just like the blazing fire turns firewood to ashes. So, the knowledge fire burns to ashes all of our karma. And the way we experience it, when you become a devotee, you don't really have karma, but what Krishna's talking here about is that we have this momentum. Like, let's say, for example, I'm engaged in spiritual activities, but I'm conditioned by my previous activities. I have material desires. One may have lust or greed, or, I may be proud and someone offends me, I get very angry. And or I become depressed, or I'm lonely. And so all these non-Vaikuntha emotions that we experience almost on a daily basis, that's the momentum of our previous karma. So Krishna says that's all burned to ashes by the knowledge fire. The knowledge fire. And then he goes on glorifying knowledge. He says, Nahi Gyani Nisadrisham, there is nothing, as Prabhupada translates it, so sublime and pure as transcendental knowledge. There's nothing so purifying in this world as knowledge. And when one is perfected through spiritual practice, in time, one enjoys that realization within oneself. And then Krishna says, Shraddhavan labhate jnana, which is translated, a faithful man, one who has faith gets this knowledge. But you have to understand the word Shraddha, which means faith. It doesn't just mean I believe God exists. Because out there in the world, people often say, like, do you have faith? It means, do you believe in God? There's a different word for that in Sanskrit, which is astikya, one of the qualities of Ram, because the word asti means he exists. He is, he exists. That's where we get, that. By the way, that's where we get the English word is, German ist, Spanish ace, French aced, phonetically, it's not, they don't pronounce that way, but all that aced, ist, is just Sanskrit asti. So from the word asti, he exists, you have the word astikyam, believing he exists. So that kind of faith, you You believe in God. That's Astikin. Shraddha means more than that. Shraddha means you, because the word da means placing. Placing, shrad, your trust. So Shraddha means you actually place your trust in something. You don't merely, you could believe God exists, but he's kind of a jerk. I mean, you could believe God exists, but he doesn't care about me, or he's given up on me, or I can never know him. You know, some people come up with all kinds of silly ideas. Some people think, I mean, that's actually sort of a popular idea among pseudo-intellectuals, that God exists, but you can never see him. Or God exists, but we can never know God. Really? Maybe you don't, but speak for yourself, Freddie. It's, I mean, that's like really perverse. We can never know God. Imagine if a man or woman, they have a child, and I will never let my child see me. That's sick. It is. I mean, it's sick. Like, I never will let my child see me. Come on, you're not that ugly. So anyway, having a child and then never letting your child know or see you is just, it's an emotional disorder. And God does not have emotional disorders. So it's actually Krishna's greatest desire that we see him. After all, I mean, imagine you have a child and, you know, little infant and sort of helpless. You have to take care of your child. And really the greatest happiness, in a sense, for a parent is that as your child grows, the child comes to know you. You know, because you can see it day by day, week by week, month by month. Your own little baby starts to look at you and realize it's you. And then as the child grows and comes to really, hopefully, reciprocate the parent's love, that's the greatest happiness for the parents. And so the idea of a God that we can never know, that's very silly. So therefore, Krishna says that that you have to really trust Krishna. If you really trust Krishna, then you get knowledge. So it's not just believing that he exists. It's believing that he exists in such a way that all your desires will be fulfilled if you just trust him. So therefore, Krishna says, if you trust me, you will understand. So Shraddhavan labhate jnanam tatpara, and you have to be dedicated to it. Tatpara means the highest. So tatpara, you have to take that knowledge as the most important thing in your life. The fact that we are so blessed, that we are so inconceivably fortunate that we've received knowledge brought to this world by the great Acharya, by Prabhupada, that's our greatest treasure. And just like, you know, if you're fortunate to have a little money in life, then you try to keep it safe. You don't invest in Ponzi schemes. Someone needs to tell the devotees that. And people that don't take their money that seriously generally are relieved of that problem of having money to worry about. But if you really value it, or you like your child, I mean, you protect your child, do everything humanly possible to protect your child, to protect your money. And so we take this knowledge of Krishna. It's by far the most valuable thing in our life. It's the most valuable thing anyone can ever have, is knowledge of Krishna. And so if you take it as the most important thing in your life, then you really get this knowledge. And Jnana Labhva, and then Krishna says, having achieved this knowledge, having received this knowledge, Parang Shanti Machirani Gashi, without delay. Achirena in Sanskrit means before long, literally before long. You will achieve the supreme peace. When you're young, you kind of like to be agitated. It's like you get to see all these younger people that become a public nuisance by having loud engines, in their cars, and they want to go fast. They just basically want to agitate themselves and make everyone else's life miserable. And so sometimes when you're like overwhelmed by passion, you actually take agitation. People go to these like Disneyland or something. They just want to get totally agitated. I remember when I was a kid with my cousin Ronnie. Ronnie. We went to this amusement park. We had this amusement park in LA, Santa Monica, called POP, Pacific Ocean Park, and they had a roller coaster. And when they were struggling to stay in business, which ultimately didn't happen, but they had this policy that, like POP, pay one price. Like you pay one price and go to any number of rides you want. So my cousin Ronnie and I went on this really serious roller coaster so many times, like over and over again, till literally I collapsed on a bench, and I as a young kid, I literally collapsed on a bench. And then I knew, okay, that's enough times on the roller coaster. So, somehow or other in my poor, undeveloped mind, I thought that's happiness, like literally knocking yourself out on a roller coaster. But when you get a little older, you really value peace. It becomes so precious. Right? Honk if you value peace. Anyway, so Krishna says you get parangshing, the supreme peace. Because after all, what disturbs our peace? An unsatisfied desire. Something that you would like, but you don't have. And so the highest peace means everything you could ever want, you have. Because everything is in Krishna. And then Krishna says, he talks about the, you understand Australia, the booby prize? Or Krishna says, agyas, literally ignorant, the one who doesn't know, agya. And chashatadana, and one who is not trusting. The one who is ignorant, who is not trusting in me. The doubting soul, literally the doubting soul, Samshayatma, Vinashati, is lost. And Krishna says, 9 lokosti na paro nasukun samshayatma. They have this sort of this way of speaking in Sanskrit where you say like, that such a person, the doubting soul, Krishna repeats it twice, the doubting soul literally does not have this world nor the next. So not to have the world literally means that just your life is in vain. Just like Krishna's mogasha, all their hopes are in vain. Moga karma, their actions are in vain. And so this world's not for you. You will derive no benefit from this world. You will derive no benefit for the next life if you are simply a doubting soul. Sort of like the summary of your existence is doubting, not believing. Because it's interesting to show you the ignorance of our age, how our age is bigoted toward agnosticism or atheism. There's a very common expression in English, which everyone knows, which is blind faith. Right? Anyone ever heard that expression? Now, logically, if your goal is correct understanding, there are 2 dangers, blind faith and blind doubt. For example, let's say you have an illness and there's actually a cure for the illness, but you doubt it and don't take it. And I've actually had a few disciples years ago who passed away young, unnecessarily, because they made the mistake of having 2 religions. One was Krishna consciousness, the other was natural medicine. That was their second religion. And they actually had curable diseases, but they were religious fanatics against allopathic medicine because, as we all know, in this age, the devil appears as allopathic medicine. doubting something which is true, like for example, let's say you're driving your car and you see a warning sign that says bridge is out up ahead. I don't believe that. So doubting what is true is equally dangerous as believing what's not true. I mean, epistemologically, in terms of philosophy of knowledge, it's not that one is more dangerous than the other. And yet in our culture, we have the term blind faith, but we do not have the term blind doubt. So all these pseudo-intellectuals, some of whom haunt our best universities, they're very afraid of blind faith, but they're not afraid of blind doubt. And that's why they become fools. So, for example, in a typical, let's say, especially leftist, Marxist influenced, so-called prestigious university, by the way, just one little note about the universities. I don't want to just bash universities. I came to Australia with this mission, to bash your universities. No, but I feel like, but there is a problem. There is a cultural problem which is being recognized more and more. For example, if you go to a good university in Australia or any other country, really, with an armband with a swastika on it, and it's not a Vedic swastika, probably people won't appreciate it, right? You go like a big swastika banner. At the same time, it's still kind of sexy on campus to say you're a Marxist. Now, the facts are that Marxism, communism in the 20th century, actually killed between 5 and 10 times more people than Hitler. I mean, think about that. These so-called intellectuals still believe in, think it's cool to believe in, an ideology that killed between 5 and 10 times more people than Hitler. Actually, it may even be 20 times more. Because in the case of Mao, in the case of Stalin, they killed so many people, so many tens of millions of people. It's like they're different calculations. But we know it's not less than 5 to 10 times more than Hitler. And yet it's still okay. So we're not talking about people whose heads are screwed on right. And among these people, if you believe in God, even if you have good reason to do so, even if you can give a very reasonable account of why you believe in God, philosophically, in terms of the same thing Lord Chaitanya said, because we have, to use technical philosophical language, properly basic self-evident experiences. Like, for example, you can't do empirical science unless you believe there's a real world outside your mind. And you can't prove there's a real world outside your mind. Because any possible empirical proof could, if the world is just an illusion, then any empirical proof is an illusion. So you can't prove there's a real world. That would involve the most absurd kind of circular reasoning. Circular reasoning means you give as evidence the very thing you're trying to prove. So thing is evidence for itself anyway. So therefore, everyone assumes there's a real world outside our mind. And that assumption is the self-evident claim that allows you to live in the world. Now, what if you have a self-evident, something that proves itself? This is the very word Lord Chaitanya used, by the way, in this discussion with Sarvabhauma and Prakashananda. Svatat Pramanyam, self-evident. If you have a self-evident experience, which we do, that Krishna is God, then in terms epistemologically, you're doing the exact same thing as any material scientist. You're building a system of knowledge based on irrefutable, self-evident experience, which is the foundation of your knowledge system. Just one more little thing, sorry. I'm having so much fun bashing. But, this is how sannyasis, kind of take out their frustrations. So, also, there's another logical problem, which is self-contradiction. It's just like, I was explaining this in other places. People are watching on Facebook. Sorry, it's a rerun. It's like another I Love Lucy show. Anyway, but I was explaining that some things are empirically can be disproved. Some things are logically disproved. Like if you say there's, let's say, a 3,000-pound elephant in this, no, that's much too small. Let's say you say there's a 3,000-pound, I don't know, renunciate. Okay, let's say I say there's a 20-foot tall human being in this room that's bent over, is in the room and he weighs 3,000 pounds. And we can all look around and say, and I say that person's visible. We can look around, we can prove to ourselves there's no such person here. But if I say there's a square circle in this room, you don't have to look, because the word square and the word circle, if you know what they mean in English, you know that the term square circle actually doesn't mean anything. It does not refer to anything. It cannot refer to anything. It's a meaningless statement. So in the same way, if you say only things that are empirically proved can be accepted as existing, you cannot empirically prove that statement. Right? You can't empirically prove that only things that are empirically proved are objective. And therefore, if the statement is true, it's not true, because it's not an empirical statement. And a statement which, if true, is not true, doesn't mean anything. It's a square circle. It doesn't mean anything. So the fanatical claims for empirical science actually are meaningless claims. They literally, logically, grammatically don't mean anything. Because if they're true, they're not true. So, getting back to this, so in academic circles, if you say I'm an agnostic, I'm an atheist, that is intellectually respectable, even if you don't give a good reason for it. In fact, you're not required to give a good reason, because skepticism is intellectually respectable without good reasons. And if you say you believe in God, even if you have very good reasons to do so, like the fact that the universe is millions of times, or your body is millions of times more technically sophisticated than the most advanced computer, which is, even if you say that doesn't prove that there's the God of religion, because maybe there's just like this really great designer. Okay, so if there's a really great designer, that means that that's the most important thing we need to study. So if you believe in God because of your own experiences, because of your common sense analysis of the nature of the world we live in, then even if you have good reasons, it's not intellectually respectable. So belief, not respectable with good reasons. Doubt, respectable without good reasons. That's called bigotry. That's called bias. That's called stupidity. And that's basically what happens. If people turn against God, their biggest reward is they get to be stupid. And they don't even know they're being so. I mean, they think they're being intellectually sophisticated when in fact they're making fools of themselves by their hypocrisy and by their inability to grasp the logic of simple things. Not only that, if you want to get a great example of how Krishna punishes or just lets these people kind of like punish themselves, imagine if there's an eternal soul, we live forever. Right? Great idea. If not, then you die. Dying can ruin your whole day. And so you have all these people who are almost angrily, or with great determination, fighting to show that they will die. I think their greatest achievement is convincing themselves and other people that we'll all die. That's like a great achievement. And they fight against their own immortality. They intellectually fight against their own immortality. That is sick. I mean, there's something really sick here. There's some, and to give you another example of how we're really talking about some kind of emotional disorder, I believe, that the essence of the empirical method is the controlled experiment. So obviously, through a controlled experiment, you can't perceive anything you can't control. And so when people claim that I only believe in science, empirical, what they're saying is nothing can exist unless I can control it. Again, not a philosophy, an emotional disorder. You know, imagine people who insist that nothing, even in principle, can exist unless they can control it. And they will fight to their last breath to prove that they're not going to live forever. We've got a very strange psychology here. And it's no wonder that a world dominated by this very sick psychology is the royal mess it is. Well, I guess technically it's only in England it's a royal mess, but here I guess it's a Commonwealth mess, Americans. Anyway, so then because you have the so-called Brahmins who are kind of crazy. They're kind of crazy. And they see no relationship between purity and knowledge. It's like, I don't have to clean my glasses to see what the world really looks like. You know, I can eat meat, I can, enjoy my body all I want. And even though I'm just totally immersed in my body, if there was a soul, I'd see it. And anyway, I mean, there's lots I could say. I'm just getting warmed up, but there's a lot to say about these things. But anyway, Krishna consciousness is really needed. And fortunately, sincere people will appreciate Krishna consciousness if we present it as a true spiritual science, not as a type of ethnic chauvinism, not as something which is ritual-based, but if we actually present Krishna consciousness as a science. Because frankly, we are not ever, in the foreseeable future, going to culturally colonize Australia. Australia is a leading first world country, and cultural influence flows down, not up. It's like water. And so, first world countries simply do not, third world culture does not flow up to first world countries. Just in this sociological term, I'm not denigrating any culture. I'm not saying that the Western culture is better. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about neutral principles of sociology and cultural transmission. It just doesn't happen. In fact, the Indian community, I know in America, probably in Australia, in America, it's the most successful immigrant community in the country. And, they're competing with 100 other groups. And because they're very intelligent. And they figured out how to fit in, and they're successful. It's probably the same thing here, isn't it? And so there's only one thing that Australia or America or these other countries, there's only one thing they'll ever accept from us, and that is a spiritual science. Not superstitions, like what you do if you drool while you're sleeping. Not a bunch or like there's these malevolent beings, sort of these dangerous beings that fly around the universe. And if you go to chant your Gayatri mantra, they they just magnetically they fly across the universe. They can penetrate your right hand, but not your left hand. You cover your right hand. They also bounce off cotton, fortunately. They can travel across the universe. They can penetrate into your subtle body, but they do bounce off cotton. And that's your best protection. And so you cover your hand. Seriously? There's so many pictures of Prabhupada. He didn't do that because Prabhupada wasn't into silly superstitions. And so, when the time comes when the time comes when we actually present to the world a spiritual science, not superstitions, not myths, like to know the real Vaishnav history. To know the real Vaishnav history. For example, what does the Bhagavatam say about how a sannyasi or brahmachari should dress? Basically, two options, and I'm kind of really deciding between them. One is deerskin, the other is wear nothing.
You'd look great in a disc.
Yeah, I'm sure I would. So, yes, can we help you? Oh, want to sit down? So, interestingly, Lord Chaitanya didn't follow, the Bhagavatams are our most important Shastra, Lord Chaitanya said, but those are time-bound instructions. Those are details. There's no such thing as a form of dress as a fundamental principle of bhakti yoga. The very idea is silly. Prabhupada said it was silly. So Lord Chaitanya did not wear deerskin or nothing. And the six Goswamis, Prabhupada once said to me in Vrindavan, I went to say goodbye to him at the end of the Mayapur Vrindavan festival. And he said to me, do you know the song of the six Goswamis? And I said, yes. He said, the six Goswamis were the ideal Vaishnava sannyasis. So if you study that song, you'll understand them. And that song says about the six Goswamis, Kopina Kantashrito. They wore kopina and rags. And we don't follow that. First of all, they didn't follow the Bhagavatam's detailed instructions, not general principles, on dress. We and Prabhupada once said to me, we were walking together in Mayapur on the roof. I was his secretary. Actually, he never asked me to do any secretarial work. I came to be a secretary. He just liked to talk. He called me in his room and we talked. And so it was a wonderful time. And so we were walking on the roof together one morning, and he told me about the latest idiotic criticism of some people in India, what he was doing. And he said some people were criticizing God brothers because he didn't follow Lord Chaitanya and walk around India. He actually took jet planes. And Prabhupada said to me, should I be a fool? Should I be a fool and imitate Mahaprabhu? Or should I take the jet and go around the world and preach? And so, if someone really wants to follow Mahaprabhu, then of course give up your computer and your cell phone and your stove, your microwave, your toaster oven. So, and then Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta adopted a sannyas dress that was used by the Ramakrishna mission, who Prabhupada had very strong feelings about. And so what we're trying to do is find a way to present a spiritual science, fit in with the society we're in, so that people are comfortable with us, and just find some way to help people to take the spiritual science, the basic principles that Krishna is God, that Krishna is the highest form of God, that we are not the body, that we can get to Krishna by devotional service. Anyway, so I'll stop here. Any questions on these points? Yes.
Maharaj, you were kind of beating down on doubt or blind doubt. And I understand with academics, they're essentially on their own path of pursuance towards ultimate knowledge or truth.
Actually, no.
Okay, if we give them the benefit of a doubt.
I don't think, for example, a history professor really thinks that by mastering the early history of the Ottoman Empire that he's going to find the ultimate truth.
Sure. So the accumulation of knowledge then.
They call it knowledge for its own sake, or they're interested in knowledge, or they like to whatever.
Is it possible that they? Modern philosophy is really following in the principles of Descartes, and where he was saying, doubt everything.
But Descartes began by doubting.
Correct.
But
And
then he realized that there were things he couldn't doubt, and ultimately couldn't doubt his own soul.
is it not possible that they understand that the natural proclivity of, the way we're engineered as human beings is to actually have belief or hope? Because in the lack of that, we would cease to want to exist. So they kind of give the counter.
Bad argument.
But they give the counter to that overarching tendency to believe.
But that's a bad
doubt.
argument. It's just a bad argument.
Why is that?
Well, because it's based on a false premise, which is that if we're wired to want or need something, it doesn't exist. Actually, for example, we are wired, let's say, to feel thirst and to look for water or some other beverage. And so by that logic, the fact that we feel a need for water means that water doesn't really exist. We just create it in our minds. Or hunger. If you actually look at our needs, our felt needs as human beings, you could say we're, wired by evolution, however you want to do it. What we find is that virtually in every case, our felt needs correspond to real things in the world that we need to get. Whether it's friendship, shelter, food, water. So therefore, if you look at human life, one would be led to the conclusion that somehow by some great gift, we are wired in such a way that we have a system, we have an alert system, so that in our mind or body, we feel a need for real things that exist and that we actually need. And so I could see that argument cuts both ways. I could say, for example, that if you want to talk about psychological needs or something, what about the psychological need to think you're smarter than everybody else? And what about the psychological need for narcissistic people to try to intellectually eliminate anything greater than me? What about the savage infighting that goes on in academic departments? And you know what I mean? It's not a pretty thing. And so if you want to play that card that you just sort of randomly pick some need that we feel, and that one is the one where we just sort of, we fantasize or we create some object in our mind to satisfy a need. Why not the need to feel that you're really smart? You're a professor.
No, but that's exactly the utility of doubt, right?
The utility of what?
Of doubt. Because we have all these tendencies which may lead us in the wrong direction. Hence, by doubting it, we can provide that counter in order to kind of find what the truth is in between that.
Doubt.
Oh, so doubt.
Oh, doubt.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, in the Bhagavatam, the third canto says the first symptom of intelligence is doubt. But why not doubt atheism? Why not doubt agnosticism?
Sure.
Why not doubt materialism?
So what you're saying is
because, for example, if I look at the structure of the universe, if I look at the structure of my body, the idea that they now found motors, little motors in individual cells. So I find the idea that the almost infinitely complex, sophisticated engineering of our own body, the wind blew, the sun shone, and I find that to be imbecilic. I think people look back in the future at these people and think they must have had some kind of serious brain disease. They are so, let's say you don't know. You look at practically an infinitely sophisticated engineering job, and the most plausible explanation you can come up with is no one built it. And that's like the most likely explanation. What is wrong with you? It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And so this hostility towards spirituality, first of all, it has to be understood in historical context. You have to understand it in the context of the rise of the Protestant Reformation, Luther's rejection of science, rejection of philosophy, the church hostility towards, so it's like payback time. After centuries of suffering under the church, Then when finally the secular scholars got power, it was like payback time. So it's nothing more than some petty, childish revenge. And so, actually, fortunately, there's a move now, even in academics, to try to reunify knowledge, which means, Aristotle said there's physics and there's metaphysics. First, okay, let me get it this way to show you how absurd these people are. I can prove to you, based on your own deepest intuition, that we live in a bidimensional universe. Consider, for example, Australia, which is a democratic country, right? You vote,
Yeah.
right? Or Julian Gillard. Anyway, so you vote. Now, democracy is based on the assumption of equality. In fact, nowadays, if you deny that different races are equal and genders are equal, basically you're the devil. It's like if you denied Jesus in the Middle Ages, the devil was talking through you. And nowadays, if you deny equality, the devil is speaking through you. Now, there's only one little problem. All of empirical science shows that we're not equal. And never mind like races or genders, just individuals. Going to, not get into that quagmire of, all that stuff. But if you look at just, all of us, never mind your race or gender, we're all unequal. All of us are unequal. Now, what's interesting in Australia, this country has chosen, in America and Canada and every other country, in creating a political system, a justice system, a social system to ignore, to reject all empirical evidence and to base a political and justice system on a metaphysical assumption. Meta in Greek means beyond or after. So there's the physical world, the natural world, empirical world, and there's the metaphysical world. So equality is quintessentially a metaphysical assumption. It has no empirical basis whatsoever. Now it's interesting that people, again, structure their entire country not on empirical facts. They reject all that, on a metaphysical fact. Now you have two choices. Either you admit that there is some significant sense, which Thomas Jefferson attributed to the fact that we're all created by God. You can either accept that we really are equal. We really are equal in some important way, even if, I can run faster than you, unlikely. Even if, in our musical abilities, mathematical abilities, physical, artistic, athletic, we're unequal. We're all different and unequal. So if you believe that in some important way we really are equal, that means you believe there is a real metaphysical dimension within the universe. It's actually real, that's totally non-empirical. If you believe, for example, that it's actually wrong, let's say, to torture and kill innocent children, what are you going to say? That no, it's not really wrong to torture and kill children. That's not really wrong. It's just that blind evolution wired us neurologically to believe that. It's just a fairy tale. Evolution has taught us a fairy tale. And it's really not wrong to torture and kill children. It's actually not wrong. So if you because that's the only possible logical conclusion of materialism. If you accept, and then they try to get around this by some stupid, social contract theory. Well, but if I kill children, then someone may kill my children. What if I say, I don't give a damn, kill my children, I'm still going to kill yours? You can't say it's wrong. You can't say it's bad. All you can say is, you can't say anything. That's materialism. By the way, one of the biggest fans of Darwin was Hitler. Hitler thought that he was just carrying out a Darwinian project. So let's say, for example, you're a true materialist. There is no metaphysical reality. There's only a physical reality. And let's say you're an environmentalist. You just want to have a healthy earth. Easiest way to get there? Kill maybe 5-6 billion people. Ecologically, it'd be fantastic. It'd be great, right? Kill 5 or 6 billion people. And if you're a materialist and you believe there's nothing real except material things, you can't say a word about that. Because if you say it's wrong, wait a second, wrong is not an empirical fact. Wrong is a metaphysical assumption. You can't say it's immoral, you can't say it's evil, you can't say anything. And so actually, almost everybody except, let's say, a true sociopath, anyone that's not a serious sociopath, like that guy in The Silence of the Lambs, anyone who's not a serious sociopath, all of us, every normal human being, scientist or not, deeply believes that some things are right, some things are wrong. And that means, go to a so-called empirical scientist and threaten his or her children and see, how faithful they are to materialism. So therefore, if there are real things in the world that are metaphysical, that means the universe is bidimensional. And that means an empirical science, which by its own ground rules can only study the physical world logically, just necessarily, by the rules of logic, can never give a complete description of the universe. So you have two choices. You can choose stupidity. You can choose irrationality. You can say that obviously when every human being consults his or her deepest intuition or deepest sense of what's real, we find that some things are right and wrong. So we can either say, I don't want to know why that's true. You can say that human beings should just sort of lobotomize themselves, and we should not inquire. We should not try to understand. We should not investigate. We should not study. How is it possible that there is a real metaphysical dimension in the universe? What does that mean about reality? How can there be a real, objective, metaphysical universe? What does that mean? And if someone's not interested in that, they're just not serious about knowledge. It means that the people who claim they're looking for knowledge, scientists, they're not serious at all. They only want things they can control. They want control. And because that's the nature of empirical knowledge. Empirical knowledge directly translates into control. Power. They want power. They want knowledge like how do you build a bomb? How do you do this? They want knowledge that gives them power. And knowledge which simply gives them appreciation of something more powerful than them, they don't want. So there are all kinds of logical problems with materialism. It's just, it's a big mess. And so all these pseudo-psychological arguments, which is what they are, they're pseudo-psychological arguments that, okay, you believe in God because of blah, blah, blah. No, that's really pretty mediocre amateur psychology. And there's absolutely no social scientific evidence whatsoever that people believe in God for psychological reasons. There's absolutely no evidence of that. So, you can respond.
It kind of went to a different point,
But that is the point.
my point was
Yes.
in regards to, I don't think there should be a deprecation of doubt, because
There should be a what?
a deprecation of doubt.
Absolutely no. There should be a deprecation of blind doubt.
But even,
I never said doubt is bad. I never said that. I said blind doubt. Anything should be deprecated if you have no good reason for doing it.
and that's doubt.
What?
And that in itself is doubt.
Doubting, I already said, doubting is given in the Bhagavatam as the first symptom of intelligence. But it's just like there's blind faith and there's reasonable faith. Blind doubt should be deprecated. If I doubt something without any good reason to doubt it, I'm being irrational. Was that your point? Yes.
It seems like many people, maybe in the 60s, became interested in another reality because of that.
Yes, of course.
I mean, doubting the myths.
Yes, therefore doubt is a sign of, yeah. And that's why a scientist pursues a theory, because a scientist doubts that the current theory is the best. So maybe I can find a better way to understand this. So yeah, I'm all for doubt. Reasonable doubt, not irrational doubt. But that was my whole point, that in the current intellectual academic climate, doubt is respectable, even when it's irrational. That's the problem. That's what I'm deprecating. It's just like I deprecate blind faith. I mean, if I think Allah has just told me to go and slaughter a bunch of innocent people, I doubt that also. Yes?
Isn't it in the case of the scientists, the reason they try to ignore the obvious is because they don't want to take the consequences? Because once you accept a higher authority, then you have to question what is it, who is it, and what is our relationship, and then we need to follow certain rules, because that higher authority, by definition, would have some rules. So they.
However, for example, if you look at the Greco-Roman world, classical,